Okay, we need to build sufficient safety in this work for a couple of reasons. First of all, the main reason I think, and what we saw with the work we've done, is that people exit this work really quickly. They form an opinion, a stereotype, and they start to say, this is going into predictable places where I think it's going to go, I'm out of here. So you've really got to get the space convened and with sufficient safety and negotiated rules and an understanding about, we need to travel together, and you have to do that with a shared negotiated process, I guess.
Yeah, I agree. Shared negotiated is the key words. Even, a discussion about what language would we feel comfortable with in describing myself as a white woman, in describing my colleague and friend as a black man. What's going to be comfortable? Different mobs all over Australia identify in different ways and appreciate different things, and that's something we often don't know about. So, exploring that together was a safety device.
That's right, and appreciating that each one of the terms that we use could actually be a trigger. Oh, don't call me that, or you can't say that in here. So you have to actually work through that kind of dynamic. And the other thing is, moving on from that, the trigger points, is how do you stay in the room? How do you stay safe enough to remain in the room and go, okay, you might be a situation where you've impacted me, but I'm actually going to stay here and we're going to learn together, rather than say, I'm gone.
Yeah. Safety is imperative, and there are many aspects to it.
Well, like we were talking about before, and you don't know which words can trigger, but you also don't know which kind of convening activities and which topics can trigger, because people are carrying trauma, intergenerational trauma, particularly within Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities. There's an overwhelming number of people who have had significant trauma impact their lives, and they're sitting in the room with people who are discovering, oh wow, these policies were in place, and then you've got people who have been at the receiving end of those policies, who've grown up with those policies. And that in itself can be difficult when others are hearing it for the first time, and you've got Indigenous people in the room who are experiencing that. But on the flip side of it, I've been in intercultural spaces where it was assumed that Indigenous people would have all this trauma and that the non-Indigenous would not. And it was actually the other way around. And the non-Indigenous people were saying, the story about stolen generation is actually triggering my trauma as well.
Yeah, I've got a personal example of that. I guess for me, as a survivor of childhood family violence, I had to really work for a long time to be ready to sit in hot and emotional and conflicted spaces. And I was just lucky to get people who mentored me and really held me while I worked out that stuff. And then I found out that, wow, because I'd survived that, I actually had some skills. But that's a long journey. So now I know I have skills for sitting in, hard spots. And I know I can survive attack. And they're really important things to have in your toolkit when you're doing this work.
And there's an additional element to that as well, as facilitators or people trying to convene a space like this, is that you have your own story where you're carrying some of this dynamic. And while you're helping others to become aware of it, start to embrace it, start to work on it, it has its own way of triggering you as a facilitator. And so there'll be times where, even in my work, I've had to say, okay, I've got to step away from this, because I can't keep going back and sitting in the space where you develop the great skills, but you're also sitting in a space where you're being constantly reminded that there's something that's not right, and you're there trying to work on this healing, but it feels really difficult.
Knowing limits and backing each other and having each other's backs. around those limits is a really good strategy.
Mm.